"Scream at me again and I will kill you," the poor woman shouted at the mob boss. What he did next shocked everyone. Comment telling me what you thought of this story with a rating from 0 to 10 and comment from which city you're watching me. I really want to know if you liked my story and I want to get to know you better, so subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. Abigail Miller always knew life wouldn't be easy for a woman like her. Born and raised on the outskirts of Chicago, in a tough working-class neighborhood, she grew up watching her mother work as a cleaner in 3 different houses to support her 2 daughters alone after their father abandoned them when Abigail was just 12. The image of her mother coming home at 10 at night, with swollen feet and a face marked by exhaustion, was etched into her memory as a constant reminder that she had to fight for a different life, to conquer a place in the sun through education and honest work. At 28, Abigail is a woman with a strong and determined personality, a graduate in business administration from a private college she paid for with great sacrifice, working during the day as an administrative assistant in an accounting firm in the downtown Loop, and freelancing as an event organizer on weekends. Every diploma, every certificate hanging on the wall of the small apartment she shares with her younger sister in a modest part of the city represents a victory against the statistics that say girls like her shouldn't get so far. She is beautiful in a natural and authentic way. With curly hair, she insists on keeping loose, despite the veiled criticisms from her office colleagues who suggest she should straighten it to look more professional. Expressive brown eyes that betray her emotional intensity even when she tries to maintain corporate composure, and a smile that can light up any room. Even when she carries the weight of her responsibilities on her shoulders, Abigail's love life has been a series of mismatches and disappointments that have left her increasingly skeptical about true love. She has dated a few men over the years, always looking for something real, a genuine connection to fill the emotional void she has carried since childhood, but invariably finds herself disappointed by the superficiality of modern relationships or with men who can't handle her independence and strong personality. Her last relationship ended 8 months ago when she discovered that the guy she had been with for almost a year was simultaneously maintaining a relationship with another woman. And since then, she has protected herself behind an armor of cynicism and distrust. Recently, pressured by her sister and friends who insist she needs to give love another chance, Abigail created a profile on a dating app, carefully choosing photos that show her genuine smile and writing an honest bio about who she is and what she's looking for. The first few weeks were frustrating, filled with empty conversations with men who clearly just wanted something casual or who disappeared after discovering she doesn't live in the city's affluent neighborhoods. She was about to give up when she received a message from Dominic Moretti. His profile was different from the others she had seen. The photos showed a mature, elegant man with a natural confidence that shone through even on the phone screen. The bio was concise, mentioning that he was a businessman, recently moved to Chicago from Italy, and was looking to meet someone interesting to share cultural experiences around the city. There were no cliché phrases about enjoying the beach and the gym, nor desperate pleas for someone to complete him. There was something intriguing in that simplicity. The conversation between them flowed naturally from the start. Dominic showed genuine interest in getting to know her, asking questions about her work, her dreams, her views on art and American culture. He was cultured and articulate, but not pedantic, making references to books and movies she also appreciated and showing real curiosity about the recommendations she made. Abigail was surprised by the depth of their conversations, while other men on the app quickly steered the conversation toward physical encounters or made superficial comments about her appearance. Dominic seemed genuinely fascinated by her mind. He asked about the books she was reading, wanted to know her opinion on art exhibitions he had visited, and debated with her about contemporary American cinema. There was an intellectual intensity in these exchanges that Abigail hadn't experienced since college, when she would spend hours in the hallways debating ideas with colleagues who shared her hunger for knowledge. One night, when the clock struck 3 in the morning and they were both still exchanging messages, Dominic wrote something that deeply touched her. He said that conversations with her made him feel alive in a way he hadn't experienced in a long time, that she challenged him to think differently, to question certainties he believed were absolute. Abigail felt something stir in her chest, a cautious hope that maybe, finally, she had found someone who could see her completely and still want to stay. After 2 weeks of daily conversations that stretched into the early hours, he invited her to dinner at a sophisticated restaurant in River North. Abigail spent hours getting ready for the date, trying on 5 different outfits before settling on a simple but elegant black dress she had bought on sale months ago. She wanted to make a good impression, but she also didn't want to look like she was trying to be someone she wasn't. When she arrived at the restaurant and saw Dominic waiting for her at the entrance, her heart raced in a way it hadn't in a long time. He was even more impressive in person than in the photos, wearing a perfectly tailored grey suit, with dark hair slightly greying at the temples that gave him an air of maturity and power, and penetrating blue eyes that seemed to read her soul when he greeted her with a kiss on the cheek. The dinner went pleasantly, with conversations about contemporary art, the differences between Italian and American culture, and Dominic's impressions of Chicago. He was charming and attentive, but Abigail also noticed something else, an intensity in his gaze that sometimes made her feel as if she were being analyzed, studied. There were moments when he seemed distant, as if his mind were elsewhere, processing information she couldn't access. When she playfully commented on it, he smiled and said it was just a habit of someone who always had to make important business decisions. During dinner, Abigail noticed small details that intrigued her. The way the maitre d' and the waiters treated him with a respect that went beyond the normal deference to a well-dressed customer, almost as if they were afraid to displease him. The man in the dark suit who sat alone at a table across the restaurant, pretending to read a newspaper, but clearly observing everything around them. The way Dominic positioned his chair to have a full view of the dining room and the entrances and exits. They were subtle details that a less observant person might not notice, but they made a distant alarm bell ring in Abigail's mind. Despite these small oddities, she found herself genuinely interested in Dominic. There was a depth to him that went beyond the superficiality of the other men she had known, a complexity that aroused her curiosity. When he took her home at the end of the night, driving a black Maserati she initially thought was rented to impress her but was clearly his, he was a perfect gentleman, walking her to the door of her building and saying goodbye with a soft kiss on her hand that left her legs trembling. The dates continued over the following weeks, always in sophisticated places in the city. Dominic took her to art galleries in Lincoln Park, exclusive restaurants on the Gold Coast, and concept bars in the West Loop. He seemed to have connections everywhere, getting reservations at establishments where the waiting list was months long. Abigail felt like she was living a life that wasn't hers, experiencing a world of luxury and exclusivity that had always seemed to belong only to the people in the soap operas her mother watched religiously. But the more time she spent with Dominic, the more the oddities accumulated. The phone calls he would answer, speaking in Italian with a tone that fluctuated between authoritarian and threatening, always stepping a few feet away from her before speaking. The times she tried to visit him at the office he claimed to have on Michigan Avenue, but he always made an excuse to meet elsewhere. The way he avoided answering direct questions about his family or his past in Italy, skillfully deflecting the conversation to other topics whenever she insisted. One night, after a month of dating, Abigail decided to do an internet search for Dominic Moretti. What she found was disturbing. The company he claimed to run, an import-export firm called Moretti International, had an extremely basic website with no relevant information about its operations or history. When she searched for the company's EIN, she discovered it had been registered just 3 months ago, a period that coincided with his arrival in the US. More worryingly, she found a few mentions on Italian news sites, which her rudimentary Italian from a translation app managed to partially decipher, linking the Moretti name to financial scandals and money laundering investigations in Milan. Fear began to settle in Abigail's chest. She knew she should end it immediately, block Dominic's number, and forget he ever existed. But there was something about him that held her. A connection she couldn't rationally explain. She remembered the moments when his mask would slip for a few seconds, revealing a deep vulnerability and loneliness that resonated with her own feelings. She saw in his eyes the same hunger for something real, for a genuine connection that transcended the social masks everyone wears. Determined to confront him and demand the truth, Abigail accepted Dominic's invitation to have dinner at his penthouse on the Gold Coast. It was the first time he had invited her to his apartment, and she took it as a sign that he might be ready to be more open with her. When she arrived at the address, a luxurious building with a doorman and armed security, she almost gave up and went home. But she took a deep breath and went on. Dominic's apartment was exactly as she had imagined, a large, sophisticated space decorated with designer furniture and works of art that were probably worth more than she would earn in a lifetime of work. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a stunning view of the illuminated city, creating an atmosphere of power and isolation. He greeted her with a smile and a glass of Italian wine that probably cost more than her monthly rent. They ate dinner in a contemplative silence, enjoying the food that had been prepared by a private chef whom Dominic dismissed as soon as he finished serving. Abigail felt the tension building inside her, the words she needed to say piling up in her throat. Finally, after they finished eating and were sitting on the Italian leather sofa overlooking the city, she gathered her courage and began to speak. Abigail confronted Dominic about her discoveries, about the shell company, about the references to financial scandals, about all the strange behaviors she had noticed over the past few weeks. She spoke with a trembling but determined voice, maintaining eye contact even when every instinct screamed at her to look away. Dominic listened to it all in silence, his face an unreadable mask, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her feel like prey being assessed by a predator. When she finished, he slowly stood up and walked to the window, standing with his back to her for long seconds that seemed to stretch into an eternity. When he finally turned around, there was something different in his eyes, a coldness she had never seen before. He spoke in a low, controlled voice, each word measured and precise, explaining that she was meddling in matters she didn't understand, that there were dangers in the world her naive mind was not aware of, and that it would be better for her to forget everything she had discovered and simply accept things as they were. The condescension in his tone, the way he treated her like a foolish child who didn't understand how the real world worked, sparked a burning anger in Abigail. She jumped up, her body vibrating with indignation, and for the first time in her life confronted someone who emanated such palpable power and danger. They argued, their voices progressively rising, Dominic trying to intimidate her with his authoritarian tone and physical presence, while Abigail refused to be belittled or silenced. It was when he raised his voice to a tone that made the windows vibrate, ordering her to shut up and accept that there were things better left unknown, that Abigail felt something inside her break. All the accumulated frustrations of a lifetime of being treated as inferior because of her background, All the men who had tried to control or diminish her, all the anger she had carefully contained, exploded in a single sentence that came out of her mouth before she could process it. "Scream at me again and I will kill you." The silence that followed was absolute. Abigail saw something change in Dominic's eyes, a darkness descending like a curtain, transforming the man she knew into something completely different. He took a step toward her, and for the first time, Abigail felt a genuine, primitive fear that made her instinctively retreat. His expression was stone, but there was something simmering behind that superficial calm, something violent and dangerous that she had awakened without fully understanding. Dominic picked up his phone and made a quick call in Italian. 2 minutes later, 3 men entered the apartment using a key they apparently had. They were large men, with scarred faces and dead eyes, the kind of people Abigail had only seen in movies or on the news about organized crime. Dominic said something to them in Italian, and before she could react, they grabbed her by the arms with a force that made her scream in pain and fear. The last thing Abigail saw before being dragged out of the apartment was Dominic's face, still expressionless, but with something that could have been regret or perhaps just the reflection of the city lights in his blue eyes. She was taken to a car with tinted windows parked in the building's garage, and as Chicago passed by the windows in a blur of lights, terror consumed her completely. She had made the fatal mistake of underestimating who Dominic really was, and now she would pay a price she couldn't even imagine. The warehouse they took her to was in an industrial area of Chicago, an abandoned place surrounded by other equally dilapidated structures. The interior smelled of mold, oil, and something metallic that she preferred not to identify. They tied her to a chair in the center of the empty space, the ropes cutting into her skin, and then left her alone in the near-complete darkness, illuminated only by a faint bulb hanging from the ceiling that swayed slightly. Abigail doesn't know how long she was left alone there, the panic giving way to a gradual numbness. She thought of her mother, her sister, how devastated they would be when they found out she had disappeared. She thought of all the choices that had led her to that moment, questioning where exactly she had gone wrong, at what point she should have realized the danger and fled. Tears streamed silently down her face, but she refused to sob or scream, maintaining a stubborn dignity even in the most degrading and terrifying situation of her life. It was only after what felt like hours that Dominic appeared. He entered alone, his footsteps echoing in the empty space, now wearing casual clothes instead of the elegant suit. There was something different about him, a raw authenticity that replaced the polished facade of the sophisticated businessman. This was Dominic Moretti in his truest form, a predator in his element, and Abigail saw with frightening clarity who he really was. He approached and stood in front of her for long minutes, just watching. Abigail forced herself to meet his eyes, refusing to show more fear than she had already shown. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and devoid of emotion, explaining with a terrible calm that in his world, threats are not jokes, that people die for much less than what she had said. He told her who he really was, about the organization he commanded, about the territories he controlled between Chicago and the ports, speaking of it all with the same naturalness as someone else would describe their office job. Abigail listened to everything in a state of shock that gradually gave way to a cold anger. When he finished, she spat on the floor at his feet and said that if he was going to kill her, he should do it quickly, because she wasn't going to beg for her own life or try to seduce him to escape. She would maintain her dignity to the end, and at least she would die knowing she hadn't bowed to a monster. Dominic's response surprised her. Instead of the anger she expected, she saw something that could have been admiration flash across his eyes before disappearing. He said she would spend a few days there, enough time for her to understand the seriousness of the situation and learn to be more careful with her words. After that, he left her alone again in the darkness. The following days developed a strange routine. Dominic would appear 2 or 3 times a day, bringing food and water, and would sit on a chair he had brought, just watching her in silence or asking questions about her life that she answered with sarcasm and defiance. He never touched her violently or sexually, never raised his voice or showed the cruelty she expected from someone in his position. There was a genuine curiosity in his questions, as if he were trying to solve a particularly complicated puzzle. On the 3rd day, something changed. Abigail, tired of the silence and constant tension, began to talk. She told him about her childhood in a rough neighborhood, about watching her mother destroy herself working 3 different jobs to give her daughters a better life, about the pain of being abandoned by her father and growing up believing she wasn't good enough to be loved. Her voice trembled as she described the night her father left. She was 12 and heard the violent argument from the room she shared with her younger sister, who slept clinging to her, frightened by the screams. When she came out the next morning, she found her mother sitting in the kitchen, her face swollen from crying and a crumpled letter in her hands. Her father had left with another woman, leaving only those few lines saying he couldn't stand the poverty anymore, that he deserved something better. Her mother never cried in front of them after that day, turning all her pain into fuel to work even harder. But Abigail saw in her tired eyes the weight of a rejection that never fully healed. She talked about every boyfriend who had disappointed her, about every time she had been judged for her background or skin color, about the dreams she still carried, despite everything. She opened her heart in a way she never had before, perhaps because she thought she was going to die anyway, and there was nothing left to lose. Dominic listened to it all without interrupting, and when she finished, something extraordinary happened. He began to talk about himself truly for the first time. He told her about growing up in Milan, in a family where violence was the only language known, about watching his father regularly beat his mother until she killed herself when Dominic was 10. He talked about being forced into the family business at 12, starting as a lookout and gradually being trained in the arts of intimidation and violence. He described the night his father was murdered in front of him when he was 25, and how he picked up the still warm gun from the floor and killed the 3 assassins before they could escape, taking control of the organization that very night, covered in his father's blood. He spoke of decades building a criminal empire, of the people he had to kill or order to be killed, of how he gradually lost pieces of his humanity until he felt nothing anymore. He confessed that he had come to the US fleeing a war with other families in Milan, bringing with him blood-stained fortunes and a reputation that preceded him. And for the first time in over 20 years, Dominic Moretti cried, silent tears streaming down his face as he looked at his own hands, as if seeing them for the first time, and being horrified by what he found. Abigail felt something change inside her at that moment. The fear didn't completely disappear, but it was joined by a deep and unexpected compassion. She saw now that Dominic wasn't simply a monster, but a broken man who had been molded by violence and trauma into something he himself hated. She thought about how her own difficult experiences could have made her bitter and cruel, and how only the loving presence of her mother and sister had saved her from that fate. Dominic hadn't been so lucky. He hadn't had anyone to love him unconditionally or show him that another path was possible. On the 4th day, the conversations between them deepened even more. Dominic had untied the ropes that bound her to the chair, allowing her to move freely around the warehouse, although guards remained outside to ensure she didn't escape. They talked about philosophy, about morality, about whether it was possible for someone like him to find redemption, or if he was forever condemned by the weight of his past actions. Abigail argued with passion that there was always a choice, that he could decide at any moment to stop and try to live differently. She cited stories she had read about people who completely changed their lives, ex-convicts who became human rights advocates, addicts who became counselors, people who turned their biggest mistakes into purpose. Her voice gained strength as she spoke, her eyes shining with an unshakable conviction that change was always possible for those who genuinely desired it. Dominic countered that she didn't understand the ties that bound him, the obligations and loyalties that would mean his death if he tried to simply walk away. He explained how his world worked, where showing weakness was a death sentence, where there was always someone waiting for any sign of vulnerability to take his place through violence. But even as he spoke, Abigail could see the doubt growing in his eyes. As if, for the first time in decades, he allowed himself to question if that path was really the only one possible. There were moments of tension when their discussions became heated, but also moments of surprising intimacy. Once, Abigail woke up from a nightmare about being killed and found Dominic sitting beside her, his large, calloused hand holding hers with a gentleness that completely contradicted his reputation. He had stayed there all night, watching over her sleep, and when their eyes met, there was a vulnerability in them that made her forget for a moment that he was her captor. On the fifth day, Dominic made a decision that surprised his own men. He entered the warehouse in the morning, took Abigail by the hand, and led her to his car without a word to the perplexed guards who watched. He drove in silence through the streets of Chicago until he stopped in front of the building where she lived. Only then did he finally speak, saying she was free to go, that she could report him to the police if she wanted, that he would accept the consequences. Abigail sat in the car for long minutes, processing what was happening. She should run out, block any memory of those terrible days, and go back to her normal life. But when she looked at Dominic, she saw a shattered man, someone who had finally allowed his defenses to fall and was now completely exposed and vulnerable. She also saw the beginning of something that could be love, a connection that had formed between them in the most unlikely and disturbing circumstances possible. It was then that Abigail made the craziest decision of her life. Instead of getting out of the car, she reached out and touched Dominic's face, forcing him to look at her. She said she wouldn't report him, but she also wouldn't just forget everything that had happened. If he truly wanted to change, if he genuinely wished to find a way out of the life that was destroying him, she would help him. But he would have to trust her completely and be willing to make difficult choices. Dominic looked at her as if he were seeing a ghost, incredulous that she was offering help instead of running or seeking revenge. From that day on, a relationship began that defied all logic and expectations. Abigail returned to her normal routine, working at the accounting firm during the day and doing her freelance work on weekends. But now she met regularly with Dominic. She established clear rules. He could not talk about criminal business with her. He would have to start finding legitimate ways to invest his money, and he would eventually need to find a way to detach himself from the organization without being killed in the process. Dominic accepted her conditions, even knowing how dangerous it would be to try to implement them. For the first time in his adult life, he had something worth risking everything for. Abigail became his anchor of sanity, the only person in the world who saw him as a complete human being instead of just a criminal or a feared leader. With her, he could let his guard down, talk about his fears and insecurities, and express the emotions he had suppressed for decades. The relationship between them quickly evolved into something intensely physical and emotional. The first time they made love was in her apartment on a rainy night 3 weeks after she had been freed. There was a desperate urgency in how they touched, as if they were both trying to prove that the connection between them was real and not just a fantasy born of extreme circumstances. Dominic was surprisingly gentle, his large, dangerous hands exploring Abigail's body with a reverence that made her cry, while she accepted him completely, offering her vulnerability as a gift and receiving his in return. But the reality of their situation soon began to impose pressures that threatened to destroy what they were building. The men in Dominic's organization began to question his decisions, noticing that he was more distracted and less cruel in his punishments. There were rumors that he was getting weak because of a woman, and in his world, weakness was a death sentence. Some of the more ambitious underlings began to plot moves to take him out of power. Abigail also faced her own pressures. Her mother and sister were worried about the changes in her behavior, about the fact that she was dating a man who refused to meet them or attend family events. Her sister Jessica, who was 23, was particularly insistent. One night, she showed up unannounced at Abigail's apartment, sat on the couch with her arms crossed, and declared she wouldn't leave until her sister told her the truth about who this mysterious man was. Abigail saw in her sister's eyes the same stubborn determination she herself possessed, the same protective impulse that had kept them together throughout their difficult childhood. With a choked voice, Abigail told part of the truth, omitting the darkest details, but admitting that Dominic had a complicated past and was trying to change. Jessica was silent for long minutes, processing the information, and when she finally spoke, her voice was full of concern, but also unconditional love. She said she trusted Abigail's judgment, that she had always admired her for her strength and intelligence, but to please be careful. The desperate plea in Jessica's voice broke something in Abigail, making her realize how much she was risking not only her own life, but also the peace of mind of the people she loved. Her friends made jokes about her being with a married man or involved in illegal activities, not knowing how close to the truth they were. And there was the constant guilt of being in love with someone who had done terrible things, who probably still ordered violent acts even as he tried to find a way out. The crisis came 6 months after they began their relationship. One of Dominic's underlings, a cruel man named Marcus, who had come with him from Italy, decided it was time to take control of the organization. He set up an ambush, surrounding Dominic's penthouse with 15 armed men and demanding that he come out and face judgment for his weakness. Dominic was prepared to fight to the death, accepting that this might be his inevitable fate when Abigail did something that completely surprised him. She called the police and reported the situation, providing the address and details about armed men about to commit a massacre. Then she grabbed the keys to Dominic's car and said they had 15 minutes before the police arrived, enough time to escape if they left immediately. Dominic was paralyzed, realizing that if he fled at that moment, he would be completely abandoning the life he knew, leaving behind not only his organization, but also all the power and wealth he had accumulated. It would effectively be signing his own death warrant, as men like Marcus would not stop hunting him until they found him. Abigail looked into his eyes and said that this was the moment he had been waiting for, the opportunity to truly choose a different life. She was offering him a chance to start over, but he had to decide now, at that very moment, if he was willing to sacrifice everything for the future they had imagined together. Dominic looked at her, at the woman who had turned his world upside down, who had made him feel and want things he believed were dead inside him, and made the most important decision of his life. They fled that night, taking only what they could carry and a limited amount of cash that Dominic kept hidden for emergencies. They left Chicago and went to the southeast, choosing Key West, Florida, a place where no one would know them, and they could disappear into the crowd of tourists and locals. Dominic had to leave behind fortunes in bank accounts he couldn't access, without exposing his location, properties, cars, everything that had defined his identity for decades. The first few months were terrible. They rented a simple house far from the tourist area, and Dominic had to learn to live like a normal person for the first time since he was a teenager. There were no underlings to do everything for him, no automatic respect and fear that his position guaranteed, no luxury to which he was accustomed. Abigail got a job as a manager at a small inn using her administrative skills, while Dominic had to take manual labor jobs in construction, hiding his soft businessman's hands under thick gloves and learning to deal with the humiliation of taking orders from men who would never have dared to look him in the eye in his previous life. There were times when Dominic almost gave up, almost called his contacts and tried to reclaim his old life. The lack of purpose, the irrelevance, the anonymity were harder to bear than any physical punishment could be. He spent entire nights awake, sweating cold with nightmares about Marcus finding them and slowly killing Abigail while forcing him to watch. There were days when he could barely look at her, crushed by the guilt of having dragged her into this life of hiding and constant paranoia. But Abigail remained firm by his side, reminding him daily why they had made that choice. She forced him to talk about his feelings instead of repressing them, to process the trauma of his previous life instead of burying it. On weekends, they would walk on the beach at dawn, and Dominic gradually began to see beauty in simple things he had never noticed before. The sunrise painting the sky orange and pink, the genuine laughter of children playing in the sand, the pleasure of sharing a simple meal with someone you love without having to worry if the food is poisoned. There was one particularly memorable morning when they found an old fisherman mending his nets on the beach. Dominic stopped to watch him, fascinated by the patience and care with which the man worked. The fisherman noticed his interest and started a conversation, talking about how he had learned the trade from his father, how each day at sea was different but equally satisfying, how the simple life brought a peace that no money could buy. When they left, Abigail saw tears in Dominic's eyes and knew that something had changed in him, that he was beginning to understand that there were other ways to measure a life's worth beyond power and wealth. After a year in Key West, they received news that would change everything again. Abigail's mother was diagnosed with advanced stage cancer. Abigail needed to return to Chicago to be by her side in her last months of life. It was a huge risk, as even after all that time, there was a chance that men from Dominic's old organization were still looking for them. But Abigail made it clear that she would go with or without him, and that she hoped he would understand that family came first. Dominic made another decision that would have been unthinkable in his previous life. He sold the only valuable asset he still had, a Rolex watch that had belonged to his father, and which he had hidden when they fled, and used the money to hire a top-tier criminal lawyer in Chicago. The lawyer negotiated a deal with the district attorney's office. Dominic would provide detailed information about the criminal operations in exchange for entry into the witness protection program and a significant reduction of any potential sentence. It was a painful process that took months. Dominic had to relive every terrible decision he had made, every life he had taken or ordered to be taken, every law he had broken. He spent weeks being interrogated by prosecutors and police, some of whom wanted to see him dead rather than making a deal. But eventually, the information he provided led to the dismantling of criminal networks in 3 states and the arrest of more than 50 people involved in illegal activities. While Dominic dealt with the legal consequences of his past actions, Abigail cared for her mother in her final months. It was a period of extreme suffering, watching the woman who had always been so strong and resilient gradually waste away, but also of deep connection and closure. Abigail's mother, in her final moments of lucidity, blessed her daughter's relationship with Dominic, saying she could see that he truly loved her and that true love was too rare to be wasted because of judgments about the past. When Abigail's mother passed away, Dominic was by her side in the hospital, holding her hand as she cried. He had been accepted into the protection program, but instead of disappearing forever, he decided to use the lawyer's contacts to create a completely new legal identity, With the help of the authorities and using the remaining money he managed to recover from offshore accounts, he established a small corporate security consulting firm, using his intimate knowledge of criminal operations to help legitimate companies protect themselves. 5 years later, Abigail and Dominic are married and living in a modest house in a suburb an hour from Chicago. Their life is quiet and profoundly ordinary, and that's exactly what Dominic has learned to value above all else. He still has occasional nightmares about his former life, still looks over his shoulder sometimes when he's in public. But he has gradually learned to live with the weight of his past without allowing it to destroy his present. Dominic's consulting firm has grown moderately but steadily, now employing 12 people and serving clients throughout the state. He discovered that he could use the knowledge he acquired so darkly to genuinely help people, preventing companies from being infiltrated by criminal organizations or teaching security protocols that could save lives. There's an irony that doesn't escape him in the fact that he is now actively fighting against the same kind of activities he once commanded. Abigail has progressed in her career, becoming the administrative director of a boutique hotel chain that operates in several towns. She travels frequently for work, and Dominic has learned to deal with the anxiety he feels when she is away, reminding himself that trust is the foundation of everything they have built together. They maintain close contact with Abigail's sister, who initially had difficulty accepting Dominic, but gradually came to see him as part of the family when it became clear how much he loves and respects Abigail. The turning point came when Jessica went through a financial crisis and was about to lose her apartment. Without Abigail's knowledge, Dominic used his own resources to help her, making it look like it was an assistance program from the company where she worked. When the truth eventually came out, Jessica sought out Dominic personally, with tears in her eyes, and hugged him for the first time, whispering a thank you that also carried a final acceptance. Since then, she has started calling him her brother-in-law with genuine affection, and Dominic discovered that having a family, even a small one, filled a void he didn't even know existed. On a quiet Friday evening, 5 years and 3 months after they fled Chicago together, Abigail and Dominic are sitting in the small garden of their home, sharing a bottle of wine and watching the stars. She is 6 months pregnant with a baby girl they have decided to name Rose in honor of Abigail's mother. Dominic places his hand on her belly and feels the baby kick, and he is overcome by an emotion so intense that he has to blink rapidly to hold back tears. Abigail asks what he's thinking, and Dominic answers with complete honesty that he's thinking about how his entire life, all the terrible choices and all the pain he caused and suffered, somehow led him to this moment. He can't regret the path he took, as dark as it was, because that path brought him to her. Abigail smiles and says that sometimes redemption doesn't come from erasing the past, but from building a future that redeems it, from creating something good and true from the ashes of what was destroyed. They sit together in comfortable silence as the night deepens, two survivors from completely different worlds who found in each other the salvation they didn't even know they were looking for. Their journey was marked by violence, fear, loss, and sacrifice, but also by love, courage, forgiveness, and transformation. They learned that true love doesn't mean accepting a person despite their flaws, but helping them become the best version of themselves, even when the process is painful and frightening. Their daughter will be born in 3 months, will grow up in a house full of love and honesty, never fully knowing about the darkness of her father's past, but understanding through daily examples the importance of choices, responsibility, and redemption. Dominic has already decided that when she is old enough, he will tell her the truth about who he was, not as a way to glorify his actions, but as a lesson on how it is possible to change, how it is never too late to choose a different path as long as you are willing to pay the price. As they watch the stars, Dominic pulls Abigail closer, breathing in the scent of her coconut shampoo and feeling the steady beat of her heart against his chest. He whispers that he loves her, that she saved his life in a way that goes beyond the physical, that she gave him something to live for when he had already given up on finding meaning or purpose. Abigail replies that he saved her too, that he taught her that true strength doesn't come from never falling, but from getting up repeatedly, from continuing to choose love and hope even when all seems lost. This is their story, a story that began with violence and fear, but evolved into love and redemption. It is not a fairy tale where love magically solves all problems, but a realistic narrative about two imperfect people who chose to fight together against their own inner darkness and against a world that insisted on saying that people like them couldn't change, that the past eternally defines who we are. They proved the world wrong, that with true love, courage, and relentless determination, even the darkest paths can eventually lead to light. If you liked this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring videos every day that will make your life happier. Comment what you thought of my story, giving it a rating from 0 to 10. And thank you very much.